All right, forget the struggle bus, dude. I'm on the struggle train. Just getting over a little bit of a cold, so I'm going to try to get through this. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Long Lens Podcast. This is the podcast where I answer questions from my filmmaking community, and we just talk about filmmaking and YouTube. My name is Nigel Bajos, and if you're new here, sometimes I have guests on this show, but the bread and butter is a Q&A. So I ask questions from my YouTube community, and then I try to answer them to the best of my abilities. So today is another one of those Q&A episodes. The way that it works is I always answer my Patreon supporter questions first, and then I go into the YouTube community page. If you'd like to join me on Patreon, I'll have links in the show notes and the description of this video. If you are listening, there is a video version. You can check that out in the show notes. Just a little bit of some housekeeping as far as gear goes. I am shooting this on a slightly different camera today. Normally, I either shoot on my S5 IIX or sometimes I'll even shoot on my little G85. Today, I'm actually shooting on a Canon 80D, believe it or not. I have this camera for review for just a little bit, so I'm doing a whole video on it on my main channel, so you can stay tuned for that. But yeah, this 80D, cool little camera. It does have a 30-minute record limit, so I'm going to try to do this in under a half an hour. But yeah, shooting on the 80D, I got my Maono mic. I actually have two of these now. I got another one for like $15 on eBay. I'm running one of these mics via XLR into my Comica AX3 XLR preamp adapter, and then that adapter is going into the 80D. I have the Sigma 18-35 shooting in CineStyle, and that's what we're rolling with. I'm just getting over a cold, so if I sound even more nasally than I normally do, that's why. So let's go into our Patreon questions first. And I have a couple questions on Patreon from Nolan Natasha, who's one of my Patreon supporters. And Nolan asks, "Hey Nigel, looks like we might be getting a new MFT camera on June 5th. Personally, I'm rooting for something compact to pair with my G9 Mark II. I'm torn about whether I want a super compact rangefinder style or just an updated G85, which feels way more practical. Would love to hear your wish list for the next MFT cam." Yeah, so the GH7 was announced yesterday, and it has basically everything what most people were asking for. I still think that it could have, maybe done with a little bit of a, low light update, but they gave us Phase Detect autofocus, internal ProRes RAW, which, DaVinci Resolve editors probably don't care about because ProRes RAW doesn't work in that. But yeah, you get ProRes RAW internally. You get 32-bit float with a new XLR adapter. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that if I was, in the Micro Four Thirds system and I just wanted an A cam to do almost anything with, especially like interviews and stuff like that, maybe documentary style, you get a GH7, that XLR adapter, and the Leica 20-50 f1.7 and 10-25 f1.7. You could pretty much do everything you needed to do with that setup. So I think it's an awesome camera. I really am going to try to get my hands on one. I'm going to try to reach out and see if someone will send one to me so I can, play with it. But yeah, GH7 has almost everything that I wanted. I feel like as far as wish lists, now I just want a entry-level camera. I feel like the G85 could use an update. And I feel like the G85, the G7, those are cameras that Lumix hasn't really updated in a while. I mean, you have the G9 Mark II, but that's an update to the G9, and the G9 wasn't necessarily an update to the G85. I feel like they were kind of out in the same time frame. So the G85, like these small little cameras, I feel like could really use an update. Even if you just gave us a G85 with like H.265 10-bit and Phase Detect autofocus, I feel like this camera would sell like hotcakes if it had Phase Detect autofocus and just the most basic 10-bit image you could possibly get. You don't even have to give us Vlog L. Just give us a 10-bit image out of this camera and we'd be happy. So the next question from Nolan was, question 2, you're going on a trip and you really want to shoot some great footage, but also need to pack light, maybe a carry-on only. What gear would you bring? Camera, lenses, and other accessories. Well, it sounds like Nolan has a G9 Mark II, so if I was going to recommend lenses, I've traveled to Hawaii with a GH3 and 15mm, and I got a lot of footage that I was really happy with. I made like a little travel film with it. So you could do something like that. Just pick something like the 15mm f1.7. It's small, compact. It won't feel like a barrel on your camera. It's kind of a pancake lens. So that could be an option to just pair with your G9 Mark II, and it'll almost force you to be a little bit more creative with your shots because you only have one field of view. Or I would go with like the 12-35 because you have a lot of different, focal lengths to choose from. But those are the two that I would go with, either a zoom or one prime, keep it on your camera and just shoot a fun video with it. I guess it depends on where you're going to. If you're going to like Iceland, maybe you would want, a bunch of different focal lengths. So getting something like a 12 to 60, which is more of like a 24 to 105, that could be an option. And then just a travel tripod and a mic. So if you want static shots, and you want to make sure that there's no wind noise in your audio, that's what I would do. So yeah, those are the things that I would bring if I was traveling just for fun. Traveling for work is a lot different, but for fun, I think it makes sense to just take as minimal gear and just try to enjoy your experience instead of trying to make it seem like a job. I know a lot of people that like travel with their entire camera kit when they go on vacation, and that just seems not fun to me at all. That was all the questions from Patreon. Thank you, Nolan, for those questions. If you would like to join Nolan and support me on Patreon, you get a bunch of other perks, not just being able to ask me questions and getting a little shout out on the podcast. I got behind the scenes stuff. You get my $5 less for free. There's a bunch of information on cheap cameras like the GH3, the EM1 Mark II. I'll probably have more videos out about this 80D. So consider joining me on Patreon. And now let's go into the YouTube community page. The first question is, I've been trying to get more expressive with my shots from the Pixel 8, doing stuff like using long exposure mode, doing walking portraits, blurry trails, making things better by making them worse. Cameras look too good. I'm compelled to mess it up. Is that a question? So yeah, I don't know if that really is a question, but I can kind of speak to kind of what you're talking about. I do think that sometimes cameras can look almost too good, and dirtying up the image, making it look a little bit less clinical there's merit to that for sure. I feel like back in the day when we were shooting with these DSLRs that had kind of a softer image, all we wanted to do was get the sharpest lens that we possibly could to get the best image quality out of these sensors. But now we have cameras like the S5 Mark IIX and all of these Sony cameras that have such sharp sensors that now we're trying to put like softer lenses on them and dirty it up and put, diffusion filters and stuff like that on our cameras. So there is something to be said about dirtying up your image a little bit and making it, look a little bit more natural. I feel like some cameras handle it better than others, like the Blackmagics, the Aries, the Reds. They give all very like natural and organic looking detailed image. But there's a different type of there's a difference between detailed and sharp. Cameras like the EM1 Mark II by Olympus that I had, I feel like that was a sharp image, not necessarily like an organically detailed image, like something that you would get on a real cinema camera. So yeah, I can totally see the merit in, dirtying up your frame a little bit. All right, the next question is actually 5 questions in one, and I'm going to try to go through these really quickly. Sony ZV-E10 versus Lumix G85. So what the G85 has over the Sony ZV-E10 is that it's weather sealed, it won't overheat, it's got better image stabilization, and it's got a viewfinder. The things that the Sony ZV-E10 has over the G85 is that it has great autofocus, it has a log profile, I think it's S-Log 2 and 3 maybe, or maybe just 2. But yeah, it's got log, and it has a bigger sensor. So those are the things that you have to consider between either of those. If you don't need phase detect autofocus, the G85 is a good option. If you want phase detect autofocus, shallower depth of field, probably better in low light, then the ZV-E10 is also a good option. I don't make any money persuading you to buy either. So you can buy either of those cameras, whichever one's going to suit your needs best. Best free video editor for filmmaking, DaVinci Resolve. The free version, you can do basically everything that you can do with the paid version, except edit 10-bit footage, which if you went with either of those cameras, they only shoot 8-bit anyways, so you'd be golden. Third one is how to make a short film in 5 steps. There's a lot that can go into that. In 5 steps, I would be find a script, find locations, find actors. I would say if you're not a director, find a director. And then 5th one would be find a capable camera. But I haven't made a short film in a really long time, at least not like a narrative short film. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask. Best cheap camera under $200. Now, I get asked this on my channel a lot, and I think that when you only have a price of like $200, you have to be willing to make a bunch of compromises. The cheaper of a camera you get, the more compromises you're going to have to be willing to take. So cameras that come to mind are like the EOS M, but you got to remember that you're going to be shooting Magic Lantern, which is the third-party software. The raw workflow is weird. There's a bunch of different crop factors. The usability of that camera is, not the greatest. So you're just gonna have to keep those things in mind. You could get cameras like the GH1, the GH2, but again, there's gonna be compromises in those cameras. Same thing with maybe a T3i you could get for around $200. You're not gonna get a lot of the things that you would get on higher end cameras. You can't be expecting autofocus or great low light performance. Even a GH3 you can get for around $200, and I built my channel off of a GH3. So you can still do great stuff. You just have to be realistic with your expectations with a $200 camera. And remember, $200 might just get you a camera. You still have to invest in lenses. All right, the last question within that question is how to become a freelance filmmaker. Kind of depends on what kind of freelance filmmaking you want to do. A lot of people start out doing weddings. That's what I started out doing. I think they're a great way to cut your teeth in filmmaking. Teaches you how to deal with clients, teaches you how to tell a story and kind of shoot documentary at the same time. So yeah, I would say start with weddings. If you do a good job on a free or a cheap wedding, you'll probably get referrals from other people that were at that wedding, and you can kind of build a business that way. All right, the next question is, would you use a Panasonic G95 for a short film or music video? Probably not. If that was the only camera I had access to, sure. But I mean, I think that the G85 is almost better than the G95. The G95 had a kind of a weird crop. It was kind of a miss, in my opinion, from Panasonic, which, they've had a significant miss pretty recently. But I feel like the G95 was kind of a miss too. I didn't really get the point of that camera. Same thing with the G100. That was a total miss. But if that's the only camera that I had to shoot a music video, sure, I would shoot it with a G95, but I would much prefer a GH5, which is probably around the same price at this point. All right, this next question is kind of a doozy, so I'm going to try to get through it as quickly as possible. First question within these 4 questions is, can you maybe, from your point of view, elaborate as kind of an independent filmmaker YouTube about the Storm with the S9? I know you know some of the YouTubers who went and what the repercussions were from the Jailed Undone video. I've tried to stay out of the whole S9 Lumix drama because I don't like jumping on hype trains or drama trains. My buddy Matt was over here, a couple weeks ago, and he had the S9. So I actually I could maybe speak about the S9 from, maybe a different perspective than a lot of people just making videos jumping on the drama train. Because I shot with it for an entire day and I have all this footage, and I was actually going to film a whole first impressions video, but then I just decided not to because that's just not what my channel is about. I very rarely talk about the latest and greatest camera, and I don't like making videos just for the sake of making them to try to garnish some views off of what's trending right now. But I did watch the Jailed Undone video, and I feel like there were 3 different kind of, points, at least that I gathered from that video. The first one is that camera reviews kind of need to change, and I can definitely see that perspective. I think that some people are kind of getting a little bit burnt out with just, an embargo drops, 20 videos get released about a camera that are all essentially the same. Everyone's talking about the same features, and everyone has only had it for a month, right? I totally see that people are getting a little bit burnt out with that. I know that it's beneficial for these companies that make the cameras and for the YouTubers that make these videos because, you do get a decent amount of views sometimes. Some of the videos that I've seen on, some of the S9 releases were kind of on the lower end. And maybe it's just because of how not well received the S9 is as a camera. But yeah, I don't know. I definitely think that there is something to be said about how useful these first impression videos are, because it isn't until you've used a camera for at least a few months on actual jobs that you start seeing the downfalls of the camera. So when you only have it for a couple of weeks and then you make a first impressions video and people make their buying decisions off of that, I mean, that's kind of, I feel like that part of the camera review industry should probably change. I personally don't ever make buying decisions off of, a YouTuber making a camera review, reading off of a spec sheet, That's really just not how I make buying decisions. The way that my mind works is I'm way more compelled to buy an FX3 because I see what Danny Gewirtz is doing with it, as opposed to buying an FX3 because I see someone in their office talking about the specs, So that's how I think about it. It's I would much rather see what people are making on a high level than just see someone review a camera. But I don't really know what the answer to the whole camera review industry is. I honestly don't, but I can see where Gerald is coming from that, perspective. The second thing that I gathered from that video from Gerald was that, it was kind of an odd choice for the people that they flew out there. And I've thought this about even their last Japan event. They flew people out last year that a lot of them weren't even Lumix shooters, right? And it's they've never flown me out anywhere, and I'm not really upset about that. I mean, it's I'm not a camera review channel, but I've been shooting Lumix since 2013. But, when I saw a lot of other Lumix shooters that I know that weren't flown out there, and it was a bunch of Canon and Sony and Blackmagic, fanboys that were flown out to Japan last year, I'm that's kind of an odd choice. And then this year, there was a large majority of people that were flown out there that, don't even have 100,000 subscribers yet. And so it does, call into question, Are they flying these smaller YouTubers out because they know that they're, still trying to like work their way up on YouTube, and they're probably not going to trash a camera if we fly them out to Japan and, give them this whole experience. Whereas, if they flew someone like Gerald out there, he probably wouldn't hold back his criticisms when he found out that the camera overheats in like 12 minutes or whatever. So I feel like that's another thing that I gathered from that video, where it's like I can honestly see the merit in that too. There are some people like my buddy Matt, who's an actual he works with Lumix a lot of the times, which like it makes sense. He's he kind of like has his entire channel dedicated to teaching people about Lumix cameras. I understand that. I understand flying, their ambassadors out there, even if their ambassadors maybe don't have a huge following on YouTube. There's, they have followings on other platforms. So I get that. But again, I just feel like what he was saying about how they released this camera, I feel like they should have done it for the GH7 and not the S9. I don't know. That's just my opinion though. And I feel like the last thing that I was gathering from that video was that like Lumix will penalize you unless you only speak highly about their cameras. Now, that's something that I honestly can't really speak to. I've only actually worked directly with Lumix once for that 100mm macro S Prime video that I did. They sent that to me for a loaner, and that's the only time I've actually like worked with them, directly. For the launch of like the original S5, I worked with an agency who like interceded between me and Lumix, and the same thing for the S5 2X videos that I did last summer. There was an agency that was kind of, like the middleman between me and Lumix. So I don't have much experience working with them directly, but, I've talked with a lot of the US, like Lumix people, and they're super rad, cool. So I can't really speak about like the marketing strategies of Lumix. I'm not really I don't like a camera brand based on what their marketing strategy is necessarily. I just care about the cameras that they put out. And that's something that I don't know, something that's like always been cringy for me in like this whole YouTube filmmaking space is just like the tribalism for camera brands, which just like blows my mind that people will get so bent out of shape if like you talk badly about their, like their favorite camera brand. Like that's just one of the most cringy things. I'm completely agnostic when it comes to cameras. Obviously, I like Lumix cameras a lot. I'm shooting on a Canon camera right now. I've had Olympus in the past. I've had Sony in the past. And it's just, I don't know. I feel like that's the part of filmmaking that like just really needs to, I feel like people just need to like take it down a notch. I mean, if you've ever, gone to like any of the forums for like Fujifilm or seen the comments on videos about Lumix, and it's just like people get really bent out of shape. And that's the part that I think that it just needs to stop. Like, I don't know. It's weird because like I've been uploading videos on this platform since 2006. And, as I've been, growing as a filmmaker, like I feel like it started out as like, hey, we're all trying to figure this whole filmmaking thing out. Let's help each other. And I feel like it's still for the most part like that, but there's this new element of like, hey, let's pick which team we're on and then viciously defend that team. And it's like, I don't know, like these camera companies aren't paying you to like defend their honor. I don't know why you're so passionate about this. Anyways, that's all I'm going to say about that. There's another question in here about the S9, but I'm just not going to really talk about it too much because I feel like it's been played out. So the other two questions within this thread are, in general, the state of filmmaking, where we are, what are your expectations for future jobs as well as cameras? So more of an artistic business analysis, maybe the kind that you do with your guests, but on yourself, which is probably more difficult. Yeah, I mean, I'm still just going to keep doing my thing on YouTube. I'm going to keep making these nostalgic look backs on, cameras that I used to own. I've been really digging, doing these types of videos, just kind of seeing what I can get out of these older cameras. As far as like outside of YouTube, I want to continue doing like the short form documentary stuff that I've been getting, paid to do here and there. I'd love to do more like smaller commercials. So I love doing YouTube and I'm going to continue doing it, but I always just think that it's smart to diversify a little bit and not just have all my eggs in one basket. So I want to do other stuff outside of YouTube as well. And then lastly in this thread is, do you think that the Sigma 28-70 is better than the new 24-70 L mount in video, price value as well? Yeah, so I have the 28-70 for my S5 IIX, and I love it. I think it's one of the best value lenses you can get for the L mount. And honestly, I got it for like $550 on eBay, and you really can't beat that. I'm sure that the 24-70 is great too, but the 28-70 is smaller and it's cheaper, and I think the image quality is great. So unless you really need that extra 4 millimeters of, field of view, I would say go with the 28-70. The next question is, after trying multiple budget lights and diffusion systems, which one would be a no-brainer for under $200? Yeah, so the light that's lighting me right now is my trusty Godox ML60. I think it's like $179. So it's under the $200 mark. Another option would be this little ML30. I just like these smaller ML series by Godox. I think they're really great. You could go with the SmallRig RC120, I believe. That one's really good. I reviewed that on my channel recently. And these small lights are just really good because they work really well on the type of diffusion that I like, which is the Photech soft lighter. And I love this style of diffusion because it blasts the light into a reflective umbrella, and then that reflected light is then diffused through a layer of diffusion, and it just gives you a really nice soft light. So I've been using this Photech soft lighter for like 5 years now, been trying to tell as many people as I can about it. There are cheaper options than the Photech one. There's one by Godox that looks pretty good, so I'll leave the links to some lights that I would suggest in the description below. Okay, and the last question for this podcast is, which brand of ND filter polarizer would you recommend as a budget filmmaker? That's funny because I actually just posted on my Instagram about breaking one of my ND filters, and I'm actually in the market for one too. A lot of people give different suggestions. I've used a lot of high-end variable ND filters and low-end ones, but I've always just been kind of looking for like that middle of the road ND filter. And I think what I'm going to go with is the Earth, URTH, Earth variable ND. Some filmmakers that I respect a lot, they say that they use that one, and it's not as expensive as like the Nissi or the Polar Pro, but it's not as cheap as like the KNF Concept. So that's probably what I'm going to go with. But a lot of people were telling me that KNF Concept is great for the price. So that could be an option too. I'll try to leave a couple of links to those in the description as well. All right, next question within that thread is, what do you think about the GH5S compared to the original Panasonic S5? I've never had the GH5S. I have had the S5. The S5 is great, but it did have a record limit on it, which was kind of weird, at least in the 10-bit modes. If you like Micro Four Thirds, you don't need image stabilization, and you want better low light out of a Micro Four Thirds camera, GH5S is the way to go. But if you don't need long record times, the S5 is great. It just doesn't have any of the newer features like Phasitech autofocus. Man, I've just been coughing this entire podcast episode. All right. Have you used the Samyang Rokinon SLR-Magic Cinema lenses before? If so, are they worth the money? I have used Samyang Rokinon cinema lenses. They were Micro Four Thirds lenses though. They were really good, but if you're looking like full frame or Super 35, I would probably go with either the SLR-Magic or maybe like the Mikey cinema lenses. So those are the ones that I would go with. I don't know I think that the Rokinon and Samyang ones are kind of old at this point and not as sharp. So if you wanted something that was a little bit newer, go with the SLR-Magics or the Mikey lenses. I'm not really sure what type of camera you have, but it kind of depends on what, lens mount you want. And the last question for this podcast episode is, what do you think about the EM1 Mark II compared to the cameras you currently use? Well, to be honest, the EM1 Mark II was one of my favorite cameras, and the phase detect autofocus on the EM1 Mark II was great. It almost never failed me. The only thing about the EM1 Mark II is that it does not have 10-bit. If that camera had 10-bit, I probably would still be using it, but you can only push the 8-bit image so much. So it does get a little bit annoying when you're trying to make different types of looks and, really heavily grade your footage. But yeah, I love that camera. I have a bunch of videos on my main channel about the camera. I have a quick start guide that I sell about that camera on my website, as well as like LUTs for, OM Log 400 and the flat profile for Olympus. I don't know. I love that camera. I think that Olympus could make the perfect camera if they just focused a little bit more on video, but they're mostly like a photography-based brand at this point, like adventure photography. Their cameras are very rugged. I wish that Olympus, or I guess OM System, would, focus a little bit more on video, but it doesn't sound like they're going to. So that's the only thing I can say is that, like, if you get into the Olympus system, the upgrade path is you'll never really get anything that you'll get with something like a Panasonic camera. That's all I can really say about it. It's a great camera. There's just no 10-bit, but the autofocus is, on par with a lot of the Sony cameras. Not all like the features, but as far as like the functionality, it worked really, really well. Anyways, those are all the questions that I had for this month's podcast. Sorry, I've been coughing and sniffling this entire podcast episode, but yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure I'll have more guests on to talk a little bit more about cameras like the GH7 here in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for listening and watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you prefer listening to your podcasts here on this platform. And if you are a podcast person, I'll have links to the podcast in the description as well. Anyways, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you all next time. Later.